Which of these two philosophies do you tend to agree with? Number one, discretion in law enforcement is crucial to both the functioning of the police department and to the relationship with the public the police department serves. Ethics in law enforcement. Or how about the second philosophy? There's no room for discretion in our field training program. MP Field Training Officer, South Dakota Game and Fish Department. Which one do you tend to agree with? And which one do you tend to disagree with? And why? Justify it. Because every decision that you make in law enforcement may have to be defended at some point down the road. And I'm not talking about by the end of the day. I'm talking it could be years after the fact, where an officer is at a minimum going to have to explain why they did or didn't use discretion. But mostly it will be an explanation followed by having to defend the decision to utilize or not utilize discretion. Every decision that a cop makes, no matter how trivial they may think it is, could blow up on them weeks, months, or years later. When an officer is asked to defend their decision to utilize or not utilize discretion, it will be to answer the question, was that decision fair? Was it fair to all parties involved? And the decision that best addresses the fairness issue is the one where the officer does not utilize discretion, that everybody's treated the same every time, regardless. Because the officer can say, I had the law on my side, and they would be right. Instead, what the officer is probably going to have to defend, if it's necessary, is how he handled the situation, his level of professionalism. The question of fairness almost always comes up when the officer has decided to utilize discretion. What were the reasons, what were the factors that went into the officer's decision to utilize discretion? That's what I want to cover. What did I use? What were the independent variables that I took into account when I ultimately made the decision to utilize discretion, knowing I might have to defend that decision weeks, months, or even years later? Now we get into what's called human dimensions in law enforcement. No discretion is often seen as robotic, and why they don't use discretion? Well, it's their enforcement philosophy, meeting quotas, following orders, they're told to do it, covering the bases just in case there's something that they might have missed. This way they get to cover the bases, and then goal-driven, where they think that arrests equal the likelihood of getting promoted. Utilizing discretion recognizes human frailty, but is the person truly appreciative? Or does the officer find out that he's being ridiculed behind his back for letting them go or going with a lesser offense? That happens a lot, and when that happens, what do the officers say? I'm never going to give anyone a break ever again. I used either whole or in part a 10-point menu of variables that would help me decide whether or not I was going to use discretion. First and foremost was age, then came experience of the violator. 3 was level of cooperation. Number 4 was wherewithal. Did they have their wits about them? Number 5 was honesty. Number 6, the number of crimes. Number 7 was the severity of the crimes. Number 8 was whether or not there was criminal intent. Number 9, criminal history. And then number 10, the acceptance of personal responsibility. Age alone was often the determining factor of whether or not I used discretion. Well, there we have it, the list of 10 variables that I used in terms of whether or not I was going to use officer discretion. I just want to make sure that I reiterate that it's not like the violator has to check off all 10 boxes. They're just the different things that an officer can take into consideration before they decide whether they want to use officer discretion. And I wanted to close out by going over this one more time. There's no room for discretion in our field training program. This is probably universal, and it explains why they're kicking out recruits that have no people skills and have less common sense than a pissant. The reason I remember this quote so well is because MP said it to me face to face, and I was dumbfounded. I was the assistant chief game warden for the state of South Dakota at the time, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. I've said time after time that it's typically the field training program where officers go awry. And all the proof I need is staring us right in the face, and it's in black and white.